The ethics of making or even watching a true crime series. Hi there, everyone. I'm Jeff, and this is Plain English lesson number 524. It's Monday, November 28th, 2022. JR is the producer, and he has uploaded this full lesson to plainenglish.com/524. Coming up today, true crime is all the rage. But not all true crime is the same, and some productions are more true than others. So what should storytellers keep in mind when producing these shows? Or, for that matter, what should audience members keep in mind as we watch? In the second half of the lesson, I'll share what it means to go about your business, and we have a quote of the week. Let's get started. The public is fascinated with true crime, and although true crime movies and series are popular now, it's not a new genre. In fact, there's an expression from the earliest days of print journalism. If it bleeds, it leads. That means that the newspaper buying public of the early 20th century wanted to read stories about blood and crime. And they wanted those stories to be true, or basically true. True crime today is a wide-ranging genre. Last week, we talked about the fictionalized series Monster and the serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer and his victims in Milwaukee in the 1980s and 1990s. It was Netflix's second most popular English language series just weeks after it was released. But the genre also includes other forms too. Some are documentaries, Making of a Murderer on Netflix and The Jinx on HBO are two of the most popular documentary form shows. The podcast Serial from 2014 is a true crime podcast in several seasons. The first season was about the murder of a girl in Baltimore. Some true crime focuses on business crimes. The Dropout, which I watched, tells about Elizabeth Holmes, the founder of Theranos. Her blood testing company was found to be fraudulent. Another, Dope Sick, fictionalizes the company responsible for pushing opioids on millions of American consumers. Then there are the shows like Cops, in which cameras ride along with police as they go about their often dramatic business. And in the US, some news programs like America's Most Wanted and Dateline talk exclusively about true crime. These are journalism, but they are sensational entertainment journalism. There are entire television networks that are based on low-budget true crime series too. But let's go back to the most popular modern form of true crime, the big-budget series and movies that you see on streaming platforms, where actors play the main characters. In these shows, the crimes are dramatized by actors. The actors portray the criminals, yes, but actors also play the victims. They play victims' families. Actors play police and prosecutors, defense attorneys, judges, witnesses, neighbors, and passers-by. There are a couple of criticisms of the true crime productions like this. First, critics say the stories are not always true to real life. In most cases, the dialogue, the specific actions can't be known for sure. So producers of true crime have to invent the dialogue and fill in the holes. And as we discussed last week, they sometimes take liberties with the story to make it a better story. I think I am basically okay with this under a few conditions. If it's clear that it's fictionalized, and if it stays basically true to the story, then I think this is fine. Nobody will ever know the words Jeffrey Dahmer spoke to his victims. We all know that the dialogue is invented. But I think it's the producer's responsibility to get this as close to reality as possible. In the Dahmer series, I wish they hadn't exaggerated the good and the evil, as I said in Thursday's lesson, but I do think they got this mostly correct. Another criticism goes like this. True crime only re-traumatizes the families of the victims. A big corporation like Netflix reopens old wounds just so they can make millions of dollars re-traumatizing people who have already suffered enough. Much of the Dahmer criticism is along these lines. These families suffered enough. All the information is in the public record. There have already been documentaries, books, and movies. The world doesn't need another series about Jeffrey Dahmer. The only reason Netflix is doing this now is to make money off victims' suffering. And by the way, the victims' families don't like how they were portrayed in the film. This is an understandable criticism, but it is not justified. It's important to have compassion for survivors, but victims' families cannot have a veto over how stories get told. If they did, then nothing would get made. And nobody likes how they're portrayed on television. That's just a fact of life. What about the idea that this production didn't need to be made because all the facts are known? Well, of course it didn't need to be made. No story does. Neither did Jurassic Park need to be made. How many World War II movies exist? Did any of those need to be made? I mean, we already know what happened, right? The fact is, artists and storytellers, whether they're authors, filmmakers, or podcast producers, they have the right to retell stories with new perspectives and new ideas. There is no copyright on publicly known facts. Storytellers, though, do have an obligation to stay as close to the truth as possible, or they risk discrediting their entire profession. There will always be an artistic point of view, different interpretations of the same facts, and other variations in how stories are told. But storytellers that gratuitously exaggerate good and evil, change key facts to fit a narrative, they run the risk of losing credibility and doing unjustified damage to people's reputations. I also think that viewers have a responsibility too. There's a new niche of journalism that closely tracks the true crime genre. Journalists watch these series and then publicly correct the record on any inconsistencies with the truth. As a viewer, I think you should sit back and enjoy the show. But before you assume it's all true, read some of those articles that point out the differences between the story and the truth. And as you watch a fictionalized story, remember that it's entertainment. If you want to know the facts, research the facts. They're out there. But if all you want is to watch the show, then don't assume that everything you're watching is true. You might remember that I raised some of these questions when I watched the movie Stillwater. We talked about that in lesson 395. This was a very fictionalized movie, very loosely, and I mean very loosely, based on a real-life case involving a woman named Amanda Knox. And I had a little bit of a problem with this. Now, don't get me wrong, the movie was great, but the producers, when they were promoting the movie, they weren't shy about saying, based on the Amanda Knox story, Amanda Knox, Amanda Knox, Amanda Knox. But then, when the real-life Amanda Knox piped up and said, a lot of this really isn't true, the producer said, oh, well, this is totally fiction, totally made up. Don't blame us. And I said at the time, you can't have it both ways. You can't ride the wave of publicity by using this woman's name, and then, when confronted with some major inconsistencies, then you turn around and hide behind the idea that it's totally fiction. I don't think that's right. I thought they should have released the movie without ever saying the name Amanda Knox because the movie was fiction. And I mean, it was more than 50% fiction. And as a viewer, I don't like being put in a position where I feel deceived. So that's when I first got this idea that the viewer also has some responsibility. I said, after watching a movie, I felt it was my obligation to go and research more of what happened so that I didn't walk away thinking that Stillwater was the real Amanda Knox story, and I'm glad I did. So if you want to hear more about that, go back and listen to lesson 395. Today's expression is to go about your business. This is an easy one to understand. The hard part is knowing when to use it. To go about your business is to do what you normally do. That's it. Just to do what you normally do on a normal day. Have you ever seen the show Cops? If you have, then I'm sorry. It's not a great show. But the idea is this. You, as a viewer, get to ride along with the police as they go about their business, as they have a normal night patrolling the streets of Memphis or Albuquerque or wherever. It's a lower budget, lower quality form of true crime. Watching Cops requires you to pretend that you're watching a normal night. The situations are real, but an hour-long show packs a lot of drama and makes it seem like every night is as dramatic as a single episode. It doesn't really show what a real normal night is like on the police force. You don't see the tedious driving around all night, the report writing, the sitting around, putting gas in their cars, whatever. The producers might spend a week following the cops around everywhere and produce like 30 minutes of content out of dozens or hundreds of hours with the police. But still, the situations are real, and they invite you to believe that you're just riding there with the cops as they go about their business, and that every hour on the beat is as dramatic as it is in the show. I remember the summer of 2021 when the weather started to get nice in Chicago. What was really nice about it was people were out going about their business. From the beginning of COVID through about the middle of 2021, so about a year, the streets were quiet, restaurants were empty, people seemed to be rushing to one place and then home again. People were not doing their normal things the way they normally did them. But then, when more people got vaccinated, the case counts went down, a pill came out, the big danger had passed. What did people do? They started going about their business. They started having a normal day, doing what they would typically do on an average day. And it felt great, at least after so much social distancing. You can also use go about your business as an imperative. When you do this, you're telling someone to carry on as if nothing were different. I'll give you an example. I like to be a pretty low maintenance house guest. So if I visit someone and my host says, "Oh, I can make some breakfast. How do you like your coffee? Do you need me to set up a place for you to work? Are you too hot? Are you too cold?" I'll say, "Stop. Go about your business. Have a normal day. I can figure out the coffee maker. If I'm cold, I'll put on a sweatshirt. Go about your business. Pretend like I'm not here." That's the kind of house guest I am. Twitter, I can't even. Elon Musk fired half the company. And the rest of the company is supposed to just go about their business? The rest of the employees are supposed to carry on like it's a normal workday? I don't see how that's possible. Pretend you're an employee of Twitter. It's not the biggest or the best social network, but it is, nonetheless, a big business with hundreds of millions of users and billions of dollars of annual revenue. Then a new boss comes along, fires all the top executives, lays off half the company, changes policies erratically, and scares away advertisers. So what are you supposed to do if you're one of the employees still working there? How can you go about your business with all this chaos going on? It must be impossible. How can you not think about this drama all day instead of thinking about your job? Now, by the way, we might be watching one of the most dramatic corporate implosions ever. It's too soon to say, but this could be a historic failure that they write about in business textbooks for decades. Or it could be one of the most successful turnarounds. We'll have to wait and see. Today's quote is by the author Kazuo Ishiguro. He was born in Japan, but went to live in England when he was a child. And he was talking about that experience, being Japanese by family and ethnicity, but growing up in England. He said it felt like he had left a place suddenly without saying goodbye. And so here's today's quote. He said, "There was another life that I might have had, but I am having this one." I've never thought or felt that way. It's weird to think someone might feel he's on one track in life and that there was an alternate life that might have been possible that he's not having. This is the kind of feeling you might have if big and sudden changes are imposed on you. So here's that quote again from Kazuo Ishiguro, a Nobel Prize winning writer. "There was another life that I might have had, but I am having this one." That's all for today's Plain English. By the way, the next true crime series I'll be watching is called The Watcher. It's creepy, based on a true story, and yes, I already did some research about what's true and what's false. The Watcher is on Netflix. And speaking of what we're watching, the final season of Better Call Saul is coming out. We talked about that one in lesson 277. At the time, there were 5 seasons. Well, the 6th and final one is coming out now. It's almost impossible to stream in the United States, but season 6 is coming out on Netflix outside the US. So if you liked that show, the last season is becoming available. I think they're releasing them 1 episode a week. I'm not sure. To prepare myself, I'm going back and watching all of seasons 1 through 5 so I can go in with maximum preparation for season 6. Well, that's all for today's lesson. We'll be back on Thursday to talk about a new scam called pig butchering. And yes, it is as bad as it sounds. See you then.